Welcome to a celebration of Nantucket Sound. Thanks for joining us. I'm your host, Audra Parker. I'm the president and CEO of the Alliance to Protect Nantucket Sound. For those of you who don't know us, we are a nonprofit environmental organization based in Hyannis on the Cape. And our mission is the long-term preservation and protection of Nantucket Sound, the beautiful body of water that lies between Cape Cod, Nantucket, and Martha's Vineyard. And this is especially important because Nantucket Sound represents the rare instance of a split jurisdiction between state and federal waters. And as you can see from this chart, we have state waters that extend 3 miles out from the shorelines of the Cape and Islands, and federal waters that lie in the center. The state waters are part of a Massachusetts ocean sanctuary system and are protected as such, while the federal waters in the center are not, despite the fact that it is one ecosystem. So the Alliance has been seeking what's called a National Historic Landmark designation to protect and preserve the entirety of Nantucket Sound. It would essentially recognize Nantucket Sound's rich maritime and tribal history, protect existing uses such as fishing and recreation, and prohibit any kind of development that would harm the historic value of Nantucket Sound. Other examples of National Historic Landmarks include the entire island of Nantucket, Wesleyan Grove in Oak Bluffs on Martha's Vineyard, and the Kennedy Compound in Hyannisport. It is the highest level of historic protection and leverages a 2010 determination by the federal government deeming that Nantucket Sound is what's called a traditional cultural place because of its importance to the tribes and making it eligible for listing on the National Register of Historic Places. The National Historic Landmark designation that we're seeking leverages that and is the highest level of historic protection. We have built a very strong, broad, diverse coalition of support. We have towns across the Cape and Islands that support permanent protection of Nantucket Sound, as well as tribal entities, environmental organization, fishing groups, historic preservation groups, and many, many others. So again, it is important to protect all of Nantucket Sound, and this webinar series is a means of spreading awareness of how special Nantucket Sound is and in various ways. So today I'm very happy to welcome Sandy Macfarlane. Sandy's a conservation administrator, shellfish biologist, and an author with more than 40 years of experience in marine science, policy, and management. She was a shellfish biologist for the town of Orleans and later served as its first conservation administrator. Sandy founded Coastal Resource Specialists, a consulting firm focused on shellfish, coastal, and watershed issues, and she was president of the New England Estuarian Research Society and a member of the Shellfish Officers Association, East Coast Shellfish and Growers Association, and National Shell Fisheries Society. So with those tongue twisters, I'm very happy to welcome Sandy today, who will talk about seashells and the stories they tell. So Sandy, welcome. Hopefully she is, there she is. Hello, Sandy.
Thank you very much, Audra. I appreciate this very much, and it's a pleasure to participate in this celebration of the Nantucket Sound and to
Perfect.
speak about shells in our world.
Okay, I'm going to get off and let you give your presentation. And then Sandy, just so you know, I will be back at the end. So if anyone from the audience has any kind of questions, I will facilitate a Q&A after your wonderful presentation.
Okay,
So,
I'll
please.
share my screen and off we go. Slideshow. There we go. Well, thank you all for being here. As I mentioned, I'm very grateful to be participating in the celebration. Shells have fascinated humans for thousands of years. They fascinated me long before I became working for the shellfish, Orleans Shellfish Department. So it's really no surprise that I began to collect shells myself. I found them, I bought some, and ones were given to me by shellfish colleagues. One thing that we tend to forget is that for each shell that you see, there is an animal. It was the home of an animal. And each of those animals has its place in the whole marine system. For us, they provide food, like oysters on the half shell. Who doesn't like oysters on the half shell? Or clams and linguine, or a plate full of steamed mussels. But Mother Nature is not able to keep up with the demand what we have put on her for the uses of shellfish, including the food. So aquaculture has come into the picture. Shellfish aquaculture is now a booming industry. But in order to eat those shellfish, we also need clean water. And we need to make sure that we're looking at the land and what happens on the land so that the stormwater drainage is being treated before it goes into our estuaries. And the nutrients from our septic systems is also being treated. The shells have provided artwork for centuries, including something like this, the Sailor's Valentine from the Nantucket Historical Society, where whalers went off to sea for years and years and in their spare time were collecting shells and making these beautiful pieces of art. They're also were used in jewelry. And although pearls are missing from this picture, there are a lot of other pieces of shell that are used for jewelry making, many of them. They come in many shapes, colors, and appearance. Take a look at the green one and keep that in mind as the presentation continues, because I'll be talking about that one later. Some stay small. Some are one shell, which would be a gastropod, usually in a whorl, and the others are two shells, which are bivalves. Others become very large, like that spindle shell that you see there, and the conch shell. I don't know what this thing I'm trying to get rid of. Oh, well, sorry about that. I don't know what that is. Abalone is iridescent, and that shines in certain light, and it's absolutely gorgeous. Or it can be the picture like Botticelli's Birth of Venus, where Venus emerges from the sea on a scallop shell. Well, let's start with scallops. We have two different species of scallops in Massachusetts, bay scallops, which are in the shallow waters and the estuaries around mainly around the Cape, but also a little bit further north than that, and sea scallops, which are found in deeper water. Sea scallops are keeping New Bedford Harbor basically afloat. They are one of the crops that is the crop that the highest grossing harbor in the United States, and it has been for the last 20 years. But scallops, bay scallops, are really interesting little animals. They have eyes that detect light, shadow, and movement. The eyes actually have a retina, a cornea, and an optic nerve. The tentacles around the eyes help the scallop to navigate and work with the eyes and avoid predators. They only live 2 years, so they're born in the summer. They grow like crazy during the summer. And then in November or December, somewhere around there, they stop feeding and they go into a dormant state. They go through the winter, and then in March or April, they become feeders again, and they put on a shell underneath the shell that was there, and that becomes a raised annual growth ring. They grow very quickly during the spring and summer, and they spawn during the summer, and then they go through their part of the cycle and go into the winter again, go into hibernation. Only this time they may die in the winter, and by April they probably will be dead. So they only spawn once in their lifetime. Eelgrass is a sign of a healthy environment, and it disappeared throughout the entire range in the 1930s from a disease called the wasting disease. It is declining again. During the first time, scallops declined as well, and it declined for decades. The connection is that scallops, when they are born and really small, will set on blades of eelgrass, and a crab is too heavy to climb up the blade of grass, so the scallop is protected from the crabs. As they grow and grow, they finally fall off and they stay on the bottom. But they also have a ability to swim. It's an erratic swimming where they clap their shells together and eject jet propulsion of water and go up and down through the water column. Scallop season is from October 1st to April 30th. It's a winter fishery. There is commercial fishing, which is inshore small skiff fishery, and then there's recreational, where people either walk or use a boat in the shallow waters. In Orleans, the towns have the authority to open the season whenever they want to after October 1st, and to set a bag limit, but no more than 10 bags to 10 bushels per person per day. In Orleans, we have three separate estuaries, and so we had three separate openings. The first one was October 1st for Cape Cod Bay. That's because that can get pretty nasty pretty quickly and when the weather changes. And so that one was open on October 1st. The Town Cove Nauset system is pretty protected. It rarely has scallops anyway, but if it does, it would be on October 12th weekend. And then November 1st is the opening for Pleasant Bay. And what we found out with keeping Pleasant Bay closed for that first month is that they grew bigger, the scallops grew bigger and sweeter during that month. And the reason for that is that the spawning has taken place, and the sugar that is the energy that goes into spawning. And once the spawning is finished, that sugar actually migrates to the muscle, which is what the part of the scallop animal that we eat. The top and bottom shell of scallops look a lot different from one another very often. And the top shell very often is a drab color, and it has marine growth on it. The bottom shelf is usually on sand, and so it sort of gets wiped clean. And so you can tell the growth ring a lot easier on the bottom shell than you can on the top shell. And despite the decline all over the state, Martha's Vineyard and Nantucket have kept up their traditional scallop industry and have kept it alive through raising seed scallops with their own hatcheries. In 1987, I was invited to join a shellfish research and production delegation to China. After 3 days in Beijing, when we didn't see any water, we were hankering for our time to see the water. We got to the Bohai Sea and asked our bus driver to stop because what we were looking at was the sea of buoys. And at that time, aquaculture had not taken off in the United States like it has at this point. So what we were witnessing was this tremendous bay that was just filled with aquaculture buoys. When we got to the Institute, we found out that some of it was for seaweed culture, but other parts of it were for scallop culture. And the scallops they were growing were from the United States. There had been a shipment from the United States of about 100 scallops, and about a dozen of them or so made it. Out of that dozen, they were able to parlay that into a multi-million metric ton industry. And years later, they started shipping them back to the United States in the true global economy. There are about 300 species of scallops, but only about 15 of them are harvested. They all look a little bit different. The large sea scallops, there's three major ones. There's the Atlantic sea scallop that is from Newfoundland to Cape Hatteras. There's a lion's paw that is populated from the Carolinas to Brazil in warmer waters, and the king scallop in the eastern Atlantic from Norway to Spain. Then we're on to hard clams. Quahogs. I'm going to call them quahogs probably till I die. But they have three different names: quahogs, hard clams, or clams. Then to just jazz it up a little bit more for confusion, they also come in size differentiations with different names. So they have chowders that are put in chowder when they're chopped up, but also for baked stuffed quahogs and fritters and anything that you're cooking that needs chopped shellfish. There's the cherry stone, which is the mid-size. They can be on the half shell. They can be clams casino. They can be cut up and cooked as well. And then there's a little neck, which is almost always, or not almost always, but often little necks on the half shell. They are the ones that really sought after, but they can be in things like cioppino or some other form of cooking. The squiggly marks that you see on the small one are a genetic marker. When the northern quahog was bred with the southern cousin that has those squiggly marks, some of them, a percentage of them, had the marks, and you can see that for its whole life. The squiggly marks stay on it. It could be stripes as well. Audra mentioned the Native Americans. They were using quahogs for eons, and the wampum, the purple pot, deep purple, was used by them for for a lot of different purposes. A lot of it was for trade. And the colonists thought that that was money. And it wasn't really money. It was they were using it for, as I said, for trade, and they were making beads into it. And a lot of those beads ended up in belts. And the Haudenosaunee Confederacy in New York is a confederacy of 5 tribes. And this belt that they have is their sacred belt that was part of the peace process. And the belt signifies the 5 tribes that were part of the Confederacy. The Mohawk is on the eastern, and they're the doorkeeper of the common longhouse. The next one is the Oneida, the people of the Standing Stone. The one on the other side of I'll put the middle one. The middle one is the Onondaga. They are the peacemakers, and they keep the council of the Confederacy. Then there is the Cayuga, and then the Seneca and the western part of New York. The story of how it got together is that these tribes were warring with one another for years, and a peacemaker came to them and said they needed to stop, and they picked out the tallest white pine, and I hope I have all of this correct, and buried their warring implements and replanted the tree, and that was the sign of peace, and they've been at peace with each other ever since. I encourage you to look at the Onondaga nationorganist.org of a website for information about the Confederacy, because it's fascinating in and of itself, but it's also fascinating with our history, because our Constitution is based a lot on what they did in the Confederacy there. Well, quahog harvesting back in the day was done with rakes with 20 to 40-foot wooden poles, working from skiffs and catboats, depending on where they were in the water. What they would do was to throw the rake in the water, teeth down, rake it up, and then bring it back up to cull it. But these poles were really awkward, and when they were raking them with the pole on their shoulder. So it was a lot of work. But in Cape Cod Bay, they were using catboats, and if they were going out of Rock Harbor, it's only navigable 2 hours before and after high tide. So generally speaking, they were out for either 4 hours or 8 hours. If they were out for 8 hours and a storm came up, they would have to try and find some lee someplace. It was a really difficult situation, but they were also using catboats and walking along the gunnel while they were raking, which is pretty hard to imagine. Then the hydraulic dredging came on, and it was used originally for sea clams on Billingsgate Shoal, but it got transferred to the quahog fishery, and it's still used to this day for quahogs, where jets of water are pumped into the substrate. And since the quahogs are not very far below the surface, they can scrape them up with the dredge that comes along behind it. The towns decided to go into looking at how they could increase their propagation through seed quahogs. Up until that time, the only way they could propagate shellfish was to take adults, plant them in other bodies of water, and hope that Mother Nature would take care of the rest. But in 1969, the barge Florida went aground in the canal and spilled thousands of gallons of oil into West Falmouth Harbor. George Souza was the shellfish constable at the time, and Arnie Carr was the shellfish biologist in the Division of Marine Fisheries. The two of them got together to try and figure out ways that they could grow quahogs. So Arnie got some bread trays from companies that were delivering bread to grocery stores and adapted them, and George built a floating sandbox raft. raft. The raft worked really well. The bread trays, not so much. Anyway, in 1975, I think it was, one of the hatcheries in North Carolina became a commercial hatchery and was opening their seed sales to all comers. And so 5 towns joined them and got some seed from North Carolina. We had nothing but questions. The questions started with, will they survive a plane ride from multiple carriers from Morehead City, North Carolina to Hyannis? Would they survive a transplant into our environment? Would they survive the summer? What are the different predators between North Carolina and here? And would they survive through that? Would they survive through the winter? Would they spawn? And on and on and on with the questions. So we did experiments. All the towns did it a little differently. We started with bottom culture, and then we moved on to the floating sandbox rafts, which worked really beautifully for our area as well. And the rafts had different configurations depending on the town's needs. And then we had very high inflation, and people are thinking that we've got high inflation now, but we were talking about double-digit inflation. Plus, Proposition 2.5 had gone through, and so the budgets were squeezed tremendously during this period. And shellfish management is not high on the priority list of municipal budgets, especially in tight times. So we were having a hard time trying to do anything with the shellfish propagation. And so a couple of the towns got together and tried to figure out whether individual hatcheries, small hatcheries, would work. So Martha's Vineyard started at first. The Martha's Vineyard Shellfish Group got underway, and they built the small. They used a building and added to it, and the one on the left is their original one. And then they got some grants and built a solar-assisted shellfish hatchery. They're still in operation. They're growing scallops, oysters, and quahogs, and delivering their seed to the towns on Martha's Vineyard. It is a public facility, and they are well known throughout the country as one of the top producers and research institutes of shellfish. So it's a marvelous thing that they have been doing for all of these years. In Eastham, they had this ramshackle boathouse down on South Pond, and that's the building that they were using for their hatchery. And in Orleans, we had a building that we transported to the water. The basics are the same. The equipment is a lot more sophisticated than what you see here, but the basics are the same. You get the animals to spawn, you grow some food to feed them. When they spawn, you need a tank or some sort of container for the larvae because they swim for 2 weeks. And then you need to clean out the larval tanks and make sure that everything is okay and make sure that nothing is contaminating those tanks. Luckily for a lot of us, this method of nursery culture came along. It was first known in a conference in Europe and brought across the pond, and it is called an upweller. It is efficient and space saving. And the way that this works is you have to have a flowing seawater system that's operating 24/7. The water gets pumped into a tank, whatever that tank is. It could be a fish box or it could be a tank. In that tank is some sort of a container. They're usually called silos. The silos have no bottom on them, but they do have netting on the bottom, and then seed sits on the netting. So the way it works is that you pump water into the tank, the water flows up through the seed and the silo, and it goes out through the trough into the water back into the estuary again. It worked really, really well. And we were able to grow 1 million seed quahogs in our building for about 5 years before the program got changed. And this is what they look like when we were getting to a plantable size. They're about the size of a quarter is what we were trying to get them up to so that we could plant them in the fall. Towns expanded their operations. Eastham, their expansion was no longer the boathouse. It was this nice greenhouse that they had at Hemingway Landing. It became the Eastham Aquaculture Technology and Training Center. In Chatham, they had this upweller facility that it's in a building, and they're growing quahogs and oysters, I believe. And then Harwich has upwellers at Witchmere Harbor, where they are using high school kids as the caretakers, and they have every square inch that is devoted to upwellers. In Yarmouth, they had field work and upwellers outside. They didn't have a building that they could put this in. And so they built their upwellers at a place that had the water and they had electricity. And their volunteers are the ones that take care of it all. And they also take care of the planting when it's ready for the shellfish to be distributed in the waterway. Soft shell clams has not been doing much as far as propagation is concerned, but there was a little bit. In Maine, they are propagating soft shell clams, and they have municipal shellfish departments as well as Massachusetts, and they've been supplying some of the towns with clams. In most towns, there is commercial clamming on the Cape and areas, but a lot of it is recreational. And again, this is Eastham, and it's a salt pond, which they rotate areas for opening. They're open one day a week on Sunday, and people have a blast down there every Sunday getting the shellfish. Phil Schwind was the shellfish constable in Eastham for many years. He was watching what Alfred Redfield was doing from Woods Hole in Barnstable Harbor with plowing up an area and seeing what clams would do in furrows. Henry took over from Phil and continued the clam planting, and that's the way that they were doing it for quite a long time. Orleans took that approach, but made it a little bit different using a mechanized plow that we were able to plow up large swaths of area. We planted clams that were spawning in our area, but were too prolific to all survive. And so we were able to thin them out and plant them in the places that we plowed. And if we planted them on an incoming tide, which we did, they dug in really well. There was very little breakage and very little predation because they were just digging in so fast. The picture on the right is a rippled sand area, which means that it's a volatile area and unlikely to have clams set on it at all. But we were trying to figure out whether that was going to be true or not. And if you look closely, you can see a couple of rows of holes going from the sort of like the southwest to the northeast corner, if you want to look at it that way. We put some netting over that area and we did catch a set, but putting netting on large swaths of acreage of flats was just untenable, both economically and for every other way. So it just really didn't work, but at least we found out a little bit more about clams. Keep in mind that what we were doing in all of these years was really experimental. There was a lot that just wasn't known, and it seems funny to say it now, but we were just trying our best to see what made these things tick. Well, the commercial guys were watching what was going on in the towns and realized that they could probably go into business and grow shellfish for a business. And so aquaculture really started to take off in Wellfleet and Provincetown, specifically for quahogs, and they were all bottom planted. And it worked really well until a disease came along called QPX, which is quahog parasite unknown. It did get named eventually, but that's what it was called originally. And it killed a lot of quahogs just before they were legal size. Didn't do anything to humans, but it just killed the quahogs, which was devastating to the industry. In the background, you can see on the right-hand side picture is an area that is used for oyster culture. So a lot of people were doing both double duty with the two different species. That takes us up to today. It's sort of the history of how we got to where we are in the shellfish aquaculture industry. It is a booming green industry at this point, and it is still growing. Each one of those plots that is being used for commercial aquaculture is on a leased public ground. It has to be unproductive area in order for the lease to be given out, or that the towns issue the leases for them. There are bottom culture and raft culture, or not raft culture, but certainly off bottom culture, floating gear. They both have pros and cons. I won't go into those, but it depends on what the situation calls for. A lot of aquaculture is site specific. They bring in a value of $30 million to Massachusetts coffers, and the U.S. value is about $350 million for shellfish alone for shellfish aquaculture. The production that's going on in our area is oyster production in Cape Cod Bay, Nantucket Sound, and Buzzards Bay. And Katuitt Oyster was one of the first companies to grow oysters, and they are still in business. Cape Cod Oyster is one of the largest companies, and Wellfleet Oyster is so well known from almost centuries of the quality of oysters that we have in this area. But oysters now are also used to filter water to remove excess nutrients from estuaries as part of wastewater management. And once the oyster can filter about 50 gallons a day per oyster. And so they take their nitrogen out of the water and put it into their bodies and shells. And once the oyster is removed from the environment that it grew in, then it is taking that nutrient out of the system. But that's one side of the coin. The other side of the coin is looking at wastewater management from the beginning of the pipe, which is our septic systems, and trying to figure out how to stop the nitrogen from getting into the groundwater in the first place. And a lot of towns are working through that. Very, very expensive processes that each town is taking on. So this is sort of a recap of that so far. There's municipal and commercial shellfish aquaculture in Massachusetts for oysters, quahogs, bay scallops, mussels, sea clams, and razor clams. And the sea clams are not cultured for their meats. They are like sea scallops. They're in deep water. They can be in shallower water too, but they're mainly in deep water. These are being cultured as seed sea clams. Say that fast three times. And the seed sea clams are called butter clams. And because they don't have to have the animals go to spawning in the natural environment, they would make a good aquaculture crop, because a lot of people are looking for alternative species in case something drastically happens to the oyster. The same thing is true of razor clams, where there's experiments going on with razor clams to see if they can be an alternative species. But like scallops, they can swim, and they have a part of their system that jets water as well, and they can shoot out of the surface of the sediment. So they're tricky to farm in a high way. In the West Coast, it's mostly oysters. It's a different species of oyster, but it's mostly oysters. But they also grow gooey ducks. And I don't know why geoduck became gooey duck, but there it is. It's a very intensive farming process, because each one of those containers that you see in these long rows is for one particular clam. So, and if you look at the hole in the for the siphon of the animal itself, and then take a look at the siphon, you know why the hole has to be so big when it's in the bottom. Now back to my shells. I just like shells in all different kinds. And if I see an oddity like this, then I'm sort of in heaven. So I see this oyster. It is an adult oyster, and it's got a juvenile oyster attached to its shell in exactly the right place for a tail, so that the whole thing looks like a fish. Now, of course, that's got to go home. That's no question about it. They have sources of mother of pearl, and the black-lipped pearl shell of Tahiti is one of those species that grows the mother of pearl, as well as abalone. And the two outside pictures are both of the same species, but they look very, very different from one another. But they are the same species. There are talons in Costa Rica that are this bright pink, and it keeps its color for its entire life and afterwards. The ones that I have are still about the same shade of pink that they were when I got them off the beaches. They're really pretty shells. They're very, very much like a clam, a soft shell clam, but they're just beautiful shells to me. Beach finds in Costa Rica, there's all kinds of little shells that are on the beaches. And the augers that you see on the right-hand side are just everywhere. But the one on the left is of particular importance because of the spines on it. It looks like a baby quahog, and keep in mind the hole. I'll be talking about the hole a little bit later. It's on the left-hand shell. A lot of times the shell is half buried, and all that's sticking out is the spine. So be beware with bare feet. It's just not advised down there. Cone snails are beautiful. They have beautiful colorations to them, and they look like an ice cream cone. That's what they look like. However, they have a harpoon-like organ that delivers a neurotoxin that disables predators like fish, but is also dangerous to humans. So they are a dangerous snail to pick up. If you don't have gloves on or you're not protected, you could get a nasty bite from these or sting from these. And you need to get help pretty quickly from that because it is a neurotoxin. But they are colorful, but you can't tell whether whether the animal is hiding inside the shell either, because it can go way up into the shell. So it's one to just stay away from and admire from a distance or make sure that it's empty. There's this group called murexes, and most of them have some sort of protrusion on them, and it's spines or protrusions. This one has thick ones, so they don't break off very easily. The one on the left, they're just small, but the pink inside that shell is absolutely gorgeous. So these are a whole range of shells that are called murexes. But this one is very highly defensive. And to me, it just clearly states stay away. It is usually buried in the sand or in some mud, and it can't be tampered with anyway. But some of them have spines and some of them don't have spines. The green one that I said, keep your mind on that one, is this absolutely gorgeous green. It's not showing up on that slide, but it really is a really pretty green. But the other part of that amazes me is that it's a shiny shell. So it looks like it was painted with a coat of urethane, and it hasn't gone away. And I've had the shell for a very, very long time, and it's still as shiny as it always has been. It also has a huge hole opening for the animal to get in and out. And I'm not really sure what that's all about, but it's a big hole. And compare that to the one next to it that has this tiny hole. The one next to it is a top shell, and it feeds on algae. So it attaches to rocks. So it's a very different type of shell, and its habitat is completely different. Helmet shells are found in the Caribbean and the Gulf of Mexico and Indo-Pacific. It's a beautiful shell. It is sort of a copper color, and it's a very thick shell. I don't know what the purposes of it being so thick is, but it is a really thick shell. But it's useful for humans for another reason. It is the matrix for carved cameos. Who knew? The cowrie is a very popular shell, especially the ones that are totally white ones. Find them in tropical areas, and they're very popular in necklaces. The one next to it is called a ton shell, and it is a fragile, sort of almost a paper thin shell, almost opaque. We can almost see through the whole shell. But what interests me about this is the decoration on it, almost like somebody took a paintbrush and painted those brown splotches on it, but they are equidistant, they're parallel to one another. It's just amazing to me that an animal that is creating the shell can create something like that as well, that is so artistically done. I just marvel at that. Same thing with the one next to it. All of those splotches are right on top of the other one, and all that white in between. So I just find shells absolutely amazing for whatever reason that I do. This one is a spider conch. It's found in the Indian Ocean and Australia. The little one does look like a spider, the top one not so much, but it's probably because the arms got broken off at some point. But it's going into it's a very thick shell also, and I don't know how old it is. I don't know how you would age something like that, but it has it's a very, very heavy shell, and it's just a real interesting one because of its name, and I don't know anything about its life history. There are predatory snails around our area. There's the channeled whelk and the knobbed whelk. I don't have a picture of or I don't have a specimen of a large knobbed whelk, but if you can barely see, the knobs are on the top of the shell. Both of them extrude their eggs like the one on the far right bottom, where they're basically the eggs are in these what I would call wafers, and when they're dry, they really do look like wafers that were like paper. They very often that you'll find one that is tucked into the bottom. The female has attached it literally to the bottom, but they're all on a string, so it really looks like a necklace. The moon snail is very different. Its egg case is that collar you see in the middle of the middle picture. It is a mixture of eggs and sand with mucus in between, and the shell, the moon snail covers its own shell with this collar until the eggs hatch. And if you ever watched a moon snail crawling across the surface, it has a very, very large gelatinous foot. And one day I was watching it capture a clam, and it literally enveloped the clam with its foot and then drilled the hole into the clam. It took a long time for it to envelop the clam, but the clam just could not dig into the bottom once the snail got a hold of it. And then we have the Neptune. The Neptune is a whelk, so it is a predatory snail. It is Massachusetts state shell. It was named in 1987. It is named after the Roman god of the sea, whose goddess was Cilicia. And the egg case is called a mermaid's necklace, just like the ones that I just showed you. It comes in from deep water of Nantucket Sound and Buzzards Bay, and it is very rarely tossed ashore. So we see them very often, but fishermen have seen them quite often when they're dragging around in those bodies of water. So the Neptune, making Nantucket Sound famous because that is the Massachusetts state shell. The queen conch comes from the Caribbean. It is an enormous shell, or can grow to an enormous size, and it was used as a horn back in the day, and maybe still is at some point. It has a real, when it is used like that, it is real deep resonant sound that can be heard from a very great distance. Speaking of horns, there is Triton's trumpet. Triton is a mythological merman, not a mermaid, always with his trident, his three-pronged trident, and a horn. And very often the horn that you will see depicted is a Triton's trumpet shell horn. Poseidon was his father, so we have the Greek god of the sea, the Greek god and the Roman god of the sea, both depicted with shells. The large Triton's trumpet is from Fiji, and you can see the Fijian. I'm not sure if that is a Fijian, but people from the South Pacific Islands are still using these shells. I think that I read that the Maoris in New Zealand are using them. I'll leave it at that. The Triton that I bought, the Triton's trumpet that I bought was at a table on an excursion that I was on. Inexpensive but huge, and I thought, well, I don't know how I'm going to get it home, but I'm going to try. And I ended up packing it in the middle of the suitcase with clothes all around it, and it came back unscathed. And I was very happy camper that it came back in one piece. The chambered nautilus is an absolute beautiful shell on the inside and the outside. And it's not a gastropod like all of the other single shells that I have shown you because of these chambers that are on the inside. Each chamber is filled with a gas that the animal produces, and that allows it to adjust its buoyancy. It's found in very deep waters in the Pacific. And it also has tentacles. The foot has evolved into tentacles. And so, believe it or not, its nearest relative is not one of the shells that I've already shown you. It is instead a squid and an octopus. And it is just amazing to me that those three things are all grouped together in mollusks, but they are at some point in their life they all were very, very related to the quahog, but it's hard to see that now. And then we get to the massive giant clam of the Pacific. These things are absolutely enormous. And I was unbelievably lucky to be snorkeling on the Great Barrier Reef when I with the excursion, and almost everybody in the water was looking at the fish and the colors of the fish and the colors of the coral. But I happened to spot a giant clam in its natural environment, and I just couldn't believe my luck. So I hovered over this thing for the longest time, just watching it siphon in and out, in and out, in and out. And I was watching how much water was being expelled. It was just, that was phenomenal in itself because you could actually see how much water was moving. And it was just incredible to me. But then I realized that there were others around, other clams around. And I was curious as to what my feet were doing behind me with flippers on, because I hadn't had flippers on in a long time. And if I happened to touch one of the clams, how fast would the shell close? And I decided I wasn't going to test it, but I was starting to get a little concerned that had to keep my eye on where my body was in relationship to these clams. But a thrill for me to see this in their native environment. But everything starts out small, including the giant clam. And all of those ridges, and you see on the one on the left, will eventually become the edges that you see on a giant clam. And there's a lot of people that collect them. They have them for like bowls in their houses, or whatever decoration that they use. But very few of them have these absolutely enormous ones. But to end this, on a remote island in French Polynesia, this beach was literally littered with juvenile giant clam shells about a foot thick. So somewhere on the reef outside those waves, there are giant clams. And as far as I'm concerned, how wonderful. So with that, I would like to thank you very much for inviting me again to speak to you tonight. And you have some contact information on the left. I do a Substack called Tidal Currents, and I also write story-driven content for organizations and people connected with the marine world. And on the right are the titles of the 3 books that I've written. So with that, I'll try and answer any questions you have. So thank you very, very much.
Thank you, Sandy. That was great. Beautiful pictures too.
Thank you.
Um, One thing that I just wanted to mention, so I have not seen gooey ducks or heard of them in a long time, but my late husband's family was from the state of Washington and they were Native Americans and they had a business scuba diving for gooey ducks and then selling them to China and to Japan where they were, pretty popular. So it's
Right.
interesting. Okay. Amanda asks, which Cape Cod beaches do you feel have the most beautiful shells?
Oh, good grief. Um,
Or
our
islands,
shells,
beaches as well?
well, our shells are not as pretty, so to speak, as the ones that I've shown you, because the tropical ones have a lot more color than ours do. So for pretty shells, I don't know. I like all shells, so I don't think I can answer that question easily. Each body of water has a different environment. So Cape Cod Bay is very different from Nantucket Sound, is very different from Pleasant Bay or all the estuaries. It's really hard. Just keep going to look and just enjoy yourself for the looking. I can't really answer that question, I'm sorry to say, but if you're in an area with scallops, can you find some scallop shells? There's probably nothing prettier than some of the scallop shells that I've found.
Okay. What can everyday beachgoers do to help protect the shellfish habitats and marine environments that make Nantucket Sound so special?
Oh, wow. Um, Pay attention to what is happening on the beaches. Join organizations like this, like all of the other ones that are trying to protect the waters in the grand scheme of things. And join a beach cleanup that almost all of the nonprofits have. And they're usually several times a year. They used to be just once, but now they're doing them several times a year. Um, keep the beaches clean. Make sure that you don't leave anything behind. Um, Put the shells when you're eating shellfish and you know where they come from, if you're getting them yourself, put the shells back in the water from which they came, because we're going to need all of that calcium when it comes when the ocean acidification really starts to hit. And so put them back. If you get them from a market and you don't know where they come from, make sure that they're clean and probably out in the sun for a long time, and that would help you to, oh, sorry,
Yep, we lost your visual.
that will help you too. Let's see, where am I? Well, I don't know.
It's okay. There should be a video
Oh, there
on
we
the
are. There we are. There we are.
here you
Okay.
are. You're back. Okay. When people, sorry, when people leave this webinar and head to the beach this summer, what's the one thing you hope they'll see differently about the shells around them?
I would like them to see that the shell is an animal and part of the environment, and an important part of the environment to boot. As I said, everything has its place, and shellfish have their place, and not just for our benefit. Their places. We're the interlopers in their world. And I keep saying that to people, that this is not our world. Our world, the marine world, is not ours. It's theirs. And to respect what you see, whatever you see, whether it's predators or not, and whatever you see there, just appreciate it and understand that these animals have been here for thousands of years, and they're just going about their business, and we're just lucky to see them and have them in our world.
Absolutely. Another question, are there shells or shell species that are particularly iconic to the Cape and Nantucket Sound?
Bay scallops, although
Okay.
they're iconic in Virginia and places south too, but they were certainly iconic to us. And quahogs, and it strikes me funny that the Neptune is the state shell, and I figure that Rhode Island stole quahogs earlier before we got to them, but they certainly are one of the shells that was around for a long time. But the rest of them are not necessarily endemic just to Cape Cod, just to our area. But that's why I gave the whole range of the shells that are here and have been here. Oysters used to be, but they became literally functionally extinct almost everywhere around the world, including our area. But the aquaculture is bringing them back, and they are the American oyster. They are along the East Coast. They're not just here, but they are a iconic species for sure. Soft shell clams, more up in Maine, but they're here too. But they're down in Maryland. So there's a whole range. They're all over the whole range. We don't have anything that's just special to our area that I know of.
Okay. Bill is asking how many varieties of shells are there in the
Oh,
world?
good Lord. Thousands, thousands and thousands.
Okay.
If there were at least 300 of scallops, you can imagine how many there are. And the ones that I showed you, the shells that I showed you, are shells that you can see, that are actually big enough to take a picture of, really. But there's a whole ton of them that are also tiny, and you'd hardly even know that they exist. But they're part of it, part of the system too. So there are thousands and thousands and thousands of species.
Okay. Thank you for that. Somebody's asking, are olives and worm shells found in Massachusetts waters?
Worm shells, if you're talking about what I think you're talking about, I think so, but I'm not 100% sure. And the olive shells, um, I don't think so. But I'm not
Okay.
I'm not positive about either one. I'm sorry. I don't mind the questions if you don't mind an I don't know answer.
No, and I don't know answer is a good answer. If you don't know, you don't know. Uh, um, yeah. Carol says, just a comment, I hope that you have visited the Bailey Matthews National Shell Museum on Sanibel Island in Florida.
I have never been to Sanibel Island.
Okay, well, I think a trip is in order,
I
right?
think so.
Um, Another comment, Julia says, wonderful presentation. Thanks so much. Another participant is asking, how badly are the microplastics affecting the marine mollusks in New
Those,
England?
that is being studied, and I don't know whether there has been any conclusion, but it is not good news. I know that. And because they are filtering the water, taking in the water, and that's their feeding mechanism. And we're talking about microplastics. I'm suspecting that it's getting into their system just like it's getting into everything else. How much damage it's causing the shellfish world, I don't know that. I know that it's being researched, but I really don't know whether there's an answer to that yet.
Okay. Shelley says, when you spoke of oysters filtering and removing nitrogen, are they then used elsewhere? As a gardener, I'm always trying to make more nitrogen available to plants.
It would break down slowly, certainly, because there is nitrogen in the shells, and there's the calcium carbonate in the shells. Um, a lot of people use that to make soil less acidic for shells. That was used a long time ago for that. Um, Boy, I don't know.
Okay.
That's a tough one. I don't
That's
know.
okay. You don't have to know everything, right?
But it could go back to the when we can get herring for this purpose, and go back to the Native American way when they planted their crops with fish in the hills with the three sisters, because they were as they were decaying, they were releasing the nitrogen. So
Yep.
have at it when they're harvestable. At this point, they're still not. They're still in a recovery mode.
Okay. Somebody is saying, I don't know what a soft-shelled clam is. Can you please explain?
A soft shell clam is remember I said the talon looked like a clam. So that's what I meant by soft shell clam. The confusion comes for me when the marketplace turned quahogs into clams, when they call them clams. Quahog and clam automatically, for us who know that they're two different, completely different animals. So the shape of a soft shell clam is the same shape as that talon that I showed, the pink talon. That's the best way that I can describe it. And actually, it's about the same size as that talon. The quahog is a completely different shape of shell. So they're very, very different. A soft shell clam digs deep. It is in the sediment that's usually a foot to a foot and a half down beneath the surface. They siphon during high tide, obviously, because they're low tide, there's nothing there. They are very productive. They exhibit what is called gregarious setting, which means that they set a lot with their parents, which is why that flat that had so many holes was an example of that. Um, they are used for steamer clams, which some people absolutely love. I just had some last week. They're also used for fried clams. That's almost always the soft shell clam. The clam strips that you buy are not soft shell clams. Those are coming from the sea clam. See, there's so many clams. That's why it drives me nuts that they're calling quahogs clams now.
We'll do another webinar just on clams. We'll have you
Anyway,
back for that.
that's the basic. They're like the talon. They're about the size and the shape of the talon. They dig deep into the sediment, and they are very different from the quahog.
Okay. Thank
They're all
you.
filter feeders. Oh,
Um, okay, Mira says, I'm so sorry I joined late and don't know if you already addressed this, but what gives the quahog shells their beautiful purple colors?
it's a mineral in the water, and it gets into their shell from their building their shell.
Okay. Several people are seconding the Bailey Matthews visit, saying it's a stunning place, well worth your time. Also, Marrow Island and trips from there to Shell Island and Keewaydin Island for shelling are also recommended. Um, Japan has amazing oysters. Sanibel Island is known for its shelling. For shelling, thank you for your presentation. Um, Another person says, thank you so much, Sandy and Audra. I'm taking invertebrate zoology in September, and I'm hoping that marine mollusks are a large part of that. Um, um, Also, sign me up for that webinar. I love clams, so I think we're going to be having you back for clamming. And then one last question. It says, can you say more about overlaps of our Constitution and the Onondaga Peace Treaty? What year was that treaty?
Ooh, the treaty. I'm not sure. I thought I read it not that long ago, but for their treaty, when they were they're getting the five tribes together, it's their history, and it goes back many, many years, but I don't know how many years. But the overlap with us is that Ben Franklin and a few others, excuse me, of the um, founding fathers went to New York and met with the people of the Haudenosaunee and found out about their system, how it works. And they have the long house that is uh, part of their constitution, where each of those five tribes has part of that long house, and they held a council meeting in there. And the Onondaga tribe is the seat of the council. That much I know that they have. There's a lot to it of how it works, and it's very similar to it ended up to be ours ended up to be very close to theirs in the way that we have a three-part system of an executive, legislative, and a
Interesting.
legal judicial branch. They have something similar that they how they solve their problems, resolve their problems. It's just, I really do urge you to go on that website because it is full of information about the Confederacy itself, and you can see how the similarities occurred and why Ben Franklin and his other people were so enthralled with it, because it was so different from everything that they knew that they had any experience with. It certainly wasn't a parliamentary system, and it wasn't a monarchy. It was something that was completely different, and that's how we became democracy, with something completely different.
Some on that note, somebody is suggesting to read Braiding with Sweetgrass.
Absolutely. Oh, it's one of my favorite books of all time.
So, and it apparently talks about native culture and governance.
Yes.
Um, okay,
Yes.
so that's it for questions, and remarkably, it's 7:01, so we were like right on time. That was wonderful, Sandy. We really appreciate you taking the time, and we do have some interest in a follow-up just on all the differences about the clam. So maybe Peter and I will be in touch with you on that. And for our audience, we have a couple more webinars coming up in the next few months. On Thursday, July 31st, we have the Cranberry Bog Project, Restoring Nature's Coastal Landscape with Karen Beatty from the Nantucket Conservation Foundation. And then in September, Ospreys on the Cape and Islands with New York Times bestselling author and National Geographic host David Gessner. So you can visit our website, saveoursound.org/ACONS, or Celebration of Nantucket Sound. And if you have any questions about our mission or for Sandy, or want to refer people to our mailing list, please stay in touch. You can reach me at audra@saveoursound.org. And again, our website is saveoursound.org. So thank you, everyone, for joining us tonight. Thank you again, Sandy, and have a great evening.
Pleasure.
Okay.
Thank you very
All
much.
right. Bye-bye.
Bye bye.